Hello and welcome to Storytime with Jocelyn. Today we're going to be reading a very special story, and I'm showing Jocelyn's window above the bookcase for a reason today. Not because of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, not because of anything else you might see up there, but because today we're going to be reading a story about a very special window. And I wanted to be able to start off a little bit with some history facts, because next month, in the middle of the month, we're going to be reading after Easter time, because we're going to read a couple of Easter stories. But in the middle of the month, we're going to be reading a special story about Titanic, because as you know in the history, April 15th, 1912, the Titanic sank in the Atlantic Ocean. So we're going to read a special children's story about that then. And today's story actually has a connection to the Titanic, a very special connection, which is very beautiful, and I hope you enjoyed today's story. Jocelyn's actually wearing, if I can show you, her first piece of jewelry in a very long time. Let's see if I can get closer to it. I don't think I can zoom in, but let's see if I can get closer. If you can see it, it is a window, and at the bottom of the necklace it says Titanic. And of course, it says it on the back as well. Now, this is a necklace that I had gotten her a while ago online, because years ago I took her to the Titanic expedition. Now, at the Titanic museums in other states, they have where they call a Holocaust or the Jews at the Titanic exhibit. Because of course there were Jews on Titanic. They even had a kosher kitchen. If you don't know what a kosher kitchen is, it is basically a kosher chef where Jews have specific ways of eating food. And that's what the kosher kitchen is for, to cook food for Jews. And so there was different types of Jews on Titanic. And so today's story is based off of one of my favorite books when I was young. It was one of the first things I read that made me cry. And that was The Diary of Anne Frank. Now, Anne Frank has a connection to Titanic, which I think is really sweet and very historical fact and very cool. So today I'm going to share how Anne Frank has a connection to Titanic. And then we're going to read a very sweet story about a window and Anne Frank and Jocelyn's necklace connection. Now, of course, I have one of my favorite books that I have and I own is The Diary of Anne Frank, but this is the critical condition, or and it has like different versions of Anne Frank's diary in it, and it has the history, it tells of the family, and it just everything. And it's basically a history and her diary in different versions, in different languages and everything. And it is just one of my favorite things, because that was one of my favorite books when growing up. And it was one of the first books that made me cry emotionally. So the connection to Titanic Anne Frank has is her father, Otto Frank. Now, Otto Frank wanted to publish his daughter's diary, but he couldn't find anyone that cared about a diary about a 13-year-old girl. You know, he couldn't find anybody to publish it. He really wanted to publish it. He even asked his friend. Now, his friend goes by the name of Nathan Strauss, and he was one of the co-owners of Macy's. Now, his brother, Isidore Strauss, which you should recognize from the stories of Titanic, died on Titanic with his wife, Ida Strauss, and they also owned Macy's with his brother, Nathan. Now, Nathan and Otto went to college together, so they were friends and they knew each other. So Otto Frank went to his friend, Nathan Strauss, which of course lost his brother on Titanic, and he said, yes, that definitely needs to be published. And guess who gets the diary published for Otto Frank is Isidore Roosevelt. And she has that sort of slight connection to the Titanic because of Otto Frank and Anne Frank. So yes, there is a slight connection from Anne Frank to Otto Frank, to Nathan Strauss, and to Isidore Strauss, who died on Titanic. So, and of course, we want to honor all the Jews that were on Titanic that died and lost their lives that day. So today's story is very beautiful that I want to read to you, and it is called The Tree in the Courtyard. Looking through Anne Frank's window. And that is what Jocelyn's necklace is about. If you could see it, it was, pause the video if you want, and you can zoom in on it, but it was the tree that she saw through the window. So this is by Jeff Gottesfeld, and it's illustrated by Peter McCartt. The Tree in the Courtyard. So let us begin with the story. The two of us looked out at the blue sky, the bare chestnut tree glistening with dew, the seagulls and other birds glittering with silver as they swooped through the air, and we were so moved and entranced that we couldn't speak. Anne Frank. The tree in the courtyard lived for 172 years. She was a horse chestnut. Her leaves were green stars, her flowers forming cones of white and pink. Each fall, she let spiky spee pods clatter to the earth. In winter, her bare bonds etched a lattice against the pale blue sky. She grew near a city canal. Seagulls flocked to her shade. For the first part of her life, her world was the courtyard. She was not yet tall enough to see beyond the homes, workshops, and factories. And then one spring, she stretched above the orange roofs and looked in the beautiful city. She spread roots and she reached skyward in peace until war came. Explosions shook the ground and rockets split the night. Strangers invaded the city. The first winter of the war, a new owner came to walk into one of the factories. He had a wife and he had 2 daughters. The older girl was quiet and proper. The younger was lively with dark hair. When they visited the factory, she would play by the canal and write by the kitchen window. She wrote for hours. Even when her father called her, she wrote. The tree loved the sight of her. In the heat of midsummer, the girl stopped coming. The tree dropped worried leaves until she spotted the girl in the factory annex. Her family was there too. A father, mother, and a boy soon joined them. Later, another man and a black cat. The girl and her father stitched ragged curtains for the main windows. From time to time, a face might peer out between the cracks. The only clear view was into the attic. There the girl would read, stroke the cat, and brush her unruly hair. Sometimes she stared at the sky. Mostly she wrote. She filled a red and white diary. You could see the window, or she could see parts of the tree in the courtyard. When airplanes roared and bombs rocked the annex, the girl fled into her father's arms. She did not come outside. The tree did not understand. The war, I know, maybes. The war, it dragged on. Once through the curtains, the tree watched the people light candles and sing, which would have been called at the time Hanukkah. The girl grew pale and thin. A young woman helper who worked in the factory brought her pens and paper. The girl wrote and wrote some more. She filled page after page. The fourth winter of the war, the tree saw the boy with the girl. They would talk and laugh or simply gaze out of the attic window at her bare branches glistening with dew, so moved and entranced that they couldn't speak. And they kissed. The tree made her blossoms extra bright that spring. Late one summer morning, men in gray uniforms came to the factory. They ripped the curtains from the attic windows, dumped the girls' papers to the floor, and herded the people into waiting black cars. The cars, they sped off. The woman from the factory gathered the girls' writing, and the tree kept a vigil. The window again with the tree. Summer, autumn, winter, spring. The seasons changed. The war ended, and only the father returned. He was thin with sad eyes as he padded through the annex like a living ghost. The woman helper gave him the girl's writing, and they cried right there next to the window where the tree could see. The tree lived on, but she never was the same. Time passed. To her surprise, other children came to the annex. They walked where the girl had walked and sat where the girl had sat. Some found a wood-blown seapod on the pavement or gazed at the tree, so moved and enchantressed that they couldn't speak. Year after year they came. By the end of the century, the tree had lived a full life. She was ready to die. Many strangers came to try to save her. They injected her with medicine. They trimmed her crown and cut sprouts from her trunk. They built her a steel support and collected her seed pods like gold coins. The tree recalled how few had tried to save the girl. You could barely see the window of the house, the factory where Anne Frank was living in the attic. The summer the girl would have turned 81. A storm snapped the tree's trunk in two. Just like the girl, she passed into history. Just like the girl, she lives on. Her seeds and saplings have been planted with love. One grows in New York City, where Twin Towers once stood. Another grows at an Arkansas high school. Still more grow in England, Argentina, and France, all around the world. Though the new trees are still young, children come to visit. They read the girl's words about a chestnut in a courtyard, glistening with dew, and touch the thin trunks. They are so entranced that they cannot speak. The girl is Anne Frank. During the occupation of the Netherlands, the Nazis deported all the Jews they could find to concentration camps. And her family hid in the rear annex of her father's factory at 263 Prinsengracht in Amsterdam. Excuse me. Until their betrayal and arrest in August 4th, 1944. They were kept alive by several of the factory workers, including the woman helper, Milp Geiss. After they were taken away, Geiss collected and saved the notebooks and pages of Anne's diary. Anne died of typhus at the Bergen-Belsen concentration camps in March, which is why we're reading this today, 1945. You know how many years that is? Can you do the math? $78 years ago. 3 weeks before the camp was liberated, Otto Franks, Anne's father, was the only survivor from the annex. After the war, Geiss returned the diary to him. He arranged for its Dutch publication. The diary first appeared in print in June of 1947 and was published in America in 1942. Since then, it has been translated into 70 languages and remains today in print. The diary refers to Anne's sewing of window curtains, July 11th, 1942. Her frightened reaction to air raids, which happened in March 10th, 1943, and a communal Chanukah celebration, December 7th, my birthday, 1942. She mentions the horse chestnut tree 3 times. The tree in the window. The quote at the start of the text is from her entry on February 23rd, 1944. Despite a 10-year effort to save the aging tree, she collapsed and died in the summer of 2010. Saplings from the tree had been planted at the following American locations, notable in the quest for freedom and tolerance. One sapling is at the National September 11th Memorial and Museum in New York, New York. One is at the Central High School, Little Rock, Arkansas, a 1957 desegregation struggle. There's one at Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., another at the Children's Museum of Indianapolis, Indiana, and Frank Peace Park. There's another one at Sonoma State University, Rohanit Park in California, the Holocaust and Genocide Memorial Grove. There's another one at Southern Cayaguag School District, Aurora, New York, at the Harriet Tubman Home, Women's Rights National Historical Park. There's another one at the Holocaust Center for Humanity in Seattle, another at the Boston Common, Boston, Massachusetts. There's another one at the Holocaust Memorial City in Farmington Hills, Michigan. And of course, another at the Idaho Anne Frank Human Rights Memorial in Boise. And another at the Clinton Presidential Center in Little Rock, Arkansas. Other saplings and seed pods from Anne Frank's tree have been planted around the world. So the tree lives on, just as the story of Anne Frank in her diaries. I hope y'all enjoyed that beautiful story of the tree that Anne Frank would see in the window when she would write her diaries from the attic in the annex house factory, where she was hiding out from the Nazis during the war. I hope y'all enjoyed that story. I know I did. That was actually the first time I ever read it with you and with Jocelyn, I was trying hard not to cry because the story is so emotional and so beautiful and so inspiring that we should never ever give up on the world. Because even in a 13-year-old girl who wrote a diary years ago, even a tree that she once looked at through a window, that tree still lives on in many places around the world and in many places around the United States of America, to bring hope and to bring peace. Right, Jocelyn? So, you heard the connection between Anne Frank, her father Otto, Nathan Strauss, and Isidore and Ida Strauss, who were on the Titanic. And we'll be reading a Titanic story in the middle of April. So I hope you'll join us for that. And Jocelyn liked to say, thank you for joining us in reading The Tree in the Courtyard. Bye-bye, and thank you for another joining us for another story time with Jocelyn. And I hope you enjoyed this story, because we surely did. And we will see you next week to begin April and a couple of Easter stories. Bye-bye.